We arrived in Sedona by midday with the sun already high, bathing the landscapes in its golden light. The red rocks surrounding us seemed to gaze into our souls, promising serenity and peace. I glanced at Michael, who was behind the wheel, and felt a twinge of irritation. His attention was once again fixed on his phone, where messages from his friends popped up one after another. My mother sat in the passenger seat, discussing the details of the upcoming anniversary with George. They had been together for 20 years, and their love always seemed exemplary to me, calm, deep, like these ancient canyons. But today, I suddenly noticed something new in their interaction. George's responses were brief, with a hint of weariness in his tone. We stopped in front of a cozy house overlooking the valley. I stepped out of the car, feeling the light fabric of my dress brushing against my knees. George carried the luggage, and his gaze lingered on me for just a moment. It was only a second, but his attention made me slightly uneasy. "Emma, would you like to go for a walk?" he suggested after lunch when Michael left to meet his friends. Mother seemed pleased with the chance to rest and waved us off with a smile. We took a trail leading to one of the local hills. George shared stories about his travels, and I laughed, trying to ignore the strange feeling that his voice sounded warmer than usual. A gentle breeze lifted the hem of my dress, and I noticed how he averted his gaze for a moment, as if trying to hide something. That evening, lying in my room, I replayed the day in my mind. Why had I suddenly started noticing something in George that I hadn't seen before? Maybe it was just my imagination. George suggested showing me the surroundings the next morning. His voice was soft, almost friendly, but deep down, I felt something different. I woke up early, but the sound of movement in the kitchen already hinted at someone's presence. As I approached, I saw George at the stove, focused as he carefully flipped pancakes with the precision that always set him apart. "Good morning," I said, sitting at the table. I had chosen a light blouse and a short skirt, hoping to freshen up my appearance after yesterday. George glanced at me briefly, but his eyes lingered for a moment longer than usual. "Good morning, Emma," he replied with a slight smile, pouring syrup over the pancakes. "You look lovely this morning." I felt a faint blush spread across my cheeks. "Thank you," I replied, trying to mask my embarrassment. We started eating. The conversation flowed easily, but at one point George said, "You've changed so much over the years. You've grown into such an adult. Sometimes it's hard to believe you're the same little girl I remember." His words caught me off guard, but they touched me. It was nice to be noticed. His voice sounded sincere, and his gaze seemed deeper than usual. Marianne walked into the kitchen, casting a quick glance at us. She silently began clearing the table, but I thought her eyes lingered on George just a little longer than they should have. As we finished breakfast, I got up to help with the dishes. My hand accidentally brushed against his as we both reached for the same plate. At that moment, I felt a strange shiver run through me, like an electric charge passing between us. I quickly stepped back, trying to hide my awkwardness. But when I looked at George, I saw that he had noticed the moment too. We both pretended nothing had happened, but that fleeting contact left a barely perceptible tension in the air. Michael left early in the morning for an excursion with his friends, leaving me alone in the quiet house. My mother was sitting in the garden with a magazine when George approached me, hesitating slightly. "Emma, how about a walk to the waterfall? There's a spot nearby I think you'd like," he suggested with a smile. I was a little surprised. In the few months since he became my stepfather, we hadn't spent much time alone together. His offer felt genuine, and I nodded. "Sure, why not?" For the walk, I chose a light summer dress and comfortable sandals. The hem of the dress lifted slightly in the breeze, revealing my legs. George seemed to make an effort not to look, but I caught his gaze lingering for a brief moment. We followed a trail surrounded by dense trees. He talked about his youth, the decisions that had shaped his life. "Sometimes I feel like I've missed out on a lot," he admitted. "I didn't always make the right choices." His voice was calm, but I sensed a tinge of regret. "Everyone makes mistakes," I replied. "I probably have too. Sometimes in my marriage I feel like I'm doing everything right, but I still feel alone." George looked at me with understanding but said nothing. We continued in silence until we reached a rocky section of the trail. I slipped slightly, but his hand caught mine instantly. His fingers gripped mine firmly, steadying me. "Careful," he said, his voice low and serious. A silence hung between us. His hand lingered on mine longer than necessary, and I felt a faint flutter. That simple gesture suddenly took on a new meaning. We moved on, but the tension between us became almost palpable, as if the closeness was no longer accidental. The evening was filled with the sounds of nighttime, the chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I stepped onto the veranda, letting the quiet envelop me. My mind was a storm of thoughts, about George, about his gaze lingering on me more often than it should. I leaned on the railing, staring into the darkness. This strange connection forming between us scared me with its intensity. Why was I thinking about him so much? He was just George, my stepfather, but something inside me kept denying it. Footsteps behind me broke the silence, and I felt a wave of tension ripple through me. George stopped nearby. His presence filled the space, palpable and heavy. I could feel his gaze on me, though I didn't dare turn to meet it. His voice was low and soft. He said something about the stars, but the meaning slipped away. I was too focused on his tone. There was something strange about it, almost intimate, making it hard to concentrate. I turned my head slightly, and our eyes met. In that moment, the air between us grew heavier. His gaze drifted over my silhouette, lingering longer than it should. His look wasn't accidental. I could feel it. He moved closer slowly, his hand brushing against mine. I didn't move, unsure if I could push him away. A moment later, his lips softly pressed against mine, and everything around me froze. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to change everything. I pulled away abruptly, as if waking from a dream, overwhelmed by guilt, panic, and something else I couldn't name. He stepped back, the silence between us becoming unbearable. His expression was filled with regret, but also understanding. I couldn't stay. Returning to my room, I sank onto the bed, unable to cope with the flood of emotions. This night would stay with me forever. It left a mark that could never be erased. The next morning, George suggested we return to the waterfall. I hesitated, recalling the previous evening, but agreed. We avoided mentioning what had happened, as if silence could erase the memory. I chose a fitted skirt and a light top, feeling how the fabric accentuated the curves of my body. Perhaps I wanted him to notice, or perhaps I was trying to understand my own feelings. The walk to the waterfall felt shorter. We moved in near silence, exchanging only brief comments. I could sense his gaze brushing over me occasionally, and that invisible contact only heightened the tension. By the waterfall, everything was still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. George stepped into the water first, leaving his clothes on the shore. His movements were confident, calm, as though he belonged there. I followed, slowly immersing myself in the cool water. We swam without touching, but every glance, every movement spoke more than words. At some point, he drew closer. His hand lightly touched my shoulder, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. When his lips met mine, everything else faded away. In that moment, there was no room for doubt or guilt. I responded, letting emotions take over. It was just the two of us, water, sunlight, and silence that no longer felt frightening. On the shore, I sat wrapped in a towel, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. George picked up a camera he had brought along. I wanted to protest but couldn't. He snapped a few pictures, his gaze studying me through the lens, and in that moment I felt the last boundaries dissolve. I glanced at the camera screen. My body, barely covered by the towel, was illuminated by soft light, highlighting every curve. I said nothing, but deep down I knew there was no turning back. The atmosphere in the house was starting to shift. Marianne watched George more often now, her glances longer and more probing, as if trying to piece something together. She seemed to always find him near me, as if by chance, and her eyes held a growing suspicion in those moments. I felt the tension, too. Every little thing drew attention, his gaze, his gestures, even his tone when he spoke to me. It seemed Marianne noticed everything. Michael had changed as well. He had grown distant, answering my questions with short, indifferent responses. It was as if he sensed something but couldn't put it into words. His behavior hurt. It felt like a wall had grown between us where once he had been my support. Things came to a head during dinner, when Michael's friend Leslie decided to make a joke. His sarcasm was always sharp, but this time his words stung. "George, you're such a caring stepdad. Taking such good care of Emma. Michael might get jealous soon," he said with a smirk, winking at Michael. I felt my cheeks burn. George pretended not to hear, but I noticed the tension in his shoulders. Marianne said nothing, but her eyes spoke volumes. After dinner, George approached me on the terrace. His expression was serious and his eyes were filled with unease. "I'm sorry for all of this," he said, looking off into the distance. "I've probably been too forward. This can't go on." His words stung. Did he regret everything? But I knew it couldn't have ended any other way. "It's fine," I replied, trying to sound calm, even though everything inside me was screaming. We stood there, close, yet feeling the tension between us grow stronger. This wasn't an ending. It was another turn in a game we couldn't stop playing. George walked away, leaving me in turmoil. His apology didn't ease the tension. It only made it sharper. I chose a short skirt and a simple blouse for the walk. I wanted to feel light, carefree, even though inside I was far from calm. George suggested a walk to the lake, and I agreed, knowing that every moment with him only deepened my conflicting emotions. He walked beside me, slightly ahead, and occasionally I caught him glancing at me, only for him to quickly look away. It seemed as though he was struggling with himself, trying not to reveal that he noticed every detail of my movements. Our conversations flowed as usual, about the weather, about nature, but something unspoken lingered between the words. Each time he lightly touched my hand or helped me step over a rock, I felt those innocent gestures take on a new meaning. His hand lingered on mine just a moment longer than necessary, stirring a strange mix of excitement and unease within me. We stopped by the water, taking in the stillness. He stood so close that I could feel the warmth of his body. I stared at my reflection in the lake, trying to suppress the emotions that were beginning to overwhelm me. Meanwhile, back at the house, as I later learned, Marianne decided to confront George. Her suspicions seemed to grow stronger by the day. She had started to notice how often he sought my company, how his attention had become more focused. But he deflected her questions, finding excuses and changing the subject. When we returned home, I felt the weight of everyone's gazes lingering on us longer than usual. Michael looked distant, while Marianne's eyes were cold and watchful, filled with quiet persistence. That night, I realized that the attraction between George and me had become noticeable not only to us. Every gesture, every word was beginning to draw the attention of those around us. The evening stretched on slowly. Marianne had left to visit a friend, and Michael was still in town. It was just George and me in the house, and the silence felt almost tangible. I sat in the living room trying to read a book, but every page slipped past without sinking in. He entered later, his footsteps soft, but my heart raced all the same. George sat across from me, his gaze brushing over me, though he hesitated to speak. I could feel that he had something to say, and the tension was unbearable. "Emma," he finally began. His voice was low, quiet. "I can't pretend anymore." I looked up at him, a wave of anxiety washing over me. He met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw the truth I had been trying so hard to deny. "I don't see you as a daughter. You're a grown woman, and what I feel? It's wrong, but I can't stop it." The words hung in the air. I wanted to respond, to draw a line, but nothing came out. Something inside me resonated with his confession, and I hated myself for it. "George, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't move, but his eyes held a plea I couldn't ignore. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I realized that resistance was futile. My body betrayed me before my mind could stop it. He leaned closer, his hand brushing my cheek. His kiss was soft, almost cautious, but it carried something that made the rest of the world fade away. When we pulled back, our breaths were heavy and the silence felt louder than any words. "This has to stay between us," he said, his tone serious. I nodded, unable to say anything. The moonlight bathed us as we stood close, our shadows blending into one. This night marked a point of no return. The house was silent, blanketed in a heavy stillness. Marianne had gone to dinner with her friends, and Michael was still in town. It was just George and me. I sat on the couch in the living room, feeling his presence even before he entered. He sat down next to me, too close for it to be accidental. Our eyes met, and I knew there would be no casual conversation tonight. "You know this is all wrong," he began, his voice low and rough, "but I can't stop." I didn't know what to say. Guilt and desire swirled together in a storm inside me. "Neither can I whispered, barely audible. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my knee. It was such a light touch, yet it stole my breath away. His hand began to slowly move higher, under the fabric of my skirt. In that moment, all doubts vanished. His movements were slow, as if giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. When our lips met, it wasn't a soft kiss. It was a storm. We stopped thinking, stopped holding back. I didn't know how much time had passed, but suddenly, I heard the sound of the front door opening. We pulled away from each other abruptly, and Mary Ann stepped into the room. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. The air in the room became still, as if time itself had frozen. I saw her gaze dart between us, and I knew there was no way to explain. The house no longer felt like a peaceful haven. After that night, everything had changed. The morning light, usually soft and warm, now felt harsh and unforgiving. Mary Ann knew the truth, and that knowledge was now a weapon she wasn't about to hide. She started with Michael. Their conversation echoed through the house, and I could hear every word. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. It didn't take long for him to understand what had happened. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Michael found me in the living room. His steps were heavy, his eyes blazing with anger. He didn't yell. His words cut like cold steel. I could see the pain in his eyes, and it was a mirror of my own guilt. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to understand. For him, everything was already clear. I couldn't defend myself. What could I say when the damage was already done? He looked at me, and I felt every glance, every breath become a judgment. Later that day, I heard Mary Ann announce her decision to file for divorce. Her voice was icy, devoid of emotion. She accused George of destroying their marriage, but her gaze shifted between us. She didn't only blame him. I was part of this catastrophe. George tried to speak with her. His voice, usually steady, sounded weary. He tried to explain, but Mary Ann wasn't listening anymore. For her, it was over. Michael kept his distance. He avoided me all day, and when he finally approached that evening, his face was so empty it terrified me. He said it was the end. He said the divorce was inevitable. His words sounded like a verdict, leaving me in complete silence. When he left, I was alone in a room that now felt too big and too cold. Everything around me was a reminder of what I had destroyed. The silence that remained was louder than any scream. The night ended, but it left a void in my life that I didn't know how to fill. The house was empty, filled with a silence broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps. After Mary Ann filed for divorce and Michael left, everything around felt lifeless. George hadn't appeared all day, as if he were avoiding me. I knew he was thinking, searching for a solution, but I dreaded what that solution might be. In the evening, I found him in the study. He was sitting at the desk, a sheet of paper in front of him nearly blank. He didn't look at me when I entered, and the silence was worse than any conversation. His usually confident posture seemed broken. Later, he left a letter on the living room table. When I walked in, he was already gone. The paper lay neatly folded, as if he wanted me to read it as soon as possible. I picked up the letter, my hands trembling. Inside were a few lines written in his familiar handwriting. "Emma, I can't stay. My presence here will only make everything worse than it already is. I hate myself for dragging you into this. You deserve better than anything I could ever give you. I'm sorry, George." The words were simple, but they hit harder than anything I could have expected. I sank onto the couch, holding the paper as if it could give me answers. Everything between us was over, but the ending left only emptiness. I stared at the letter, feeling the pain grow inside me. This was his final "I'm sorry," his way of leaving while leaving behind the destruction. But how could he understand that this pain was mine to carry now, that I was the one left alone with it? Without thinking, I tore the letter into tiny pieces. The paper scattered on the floor like remnants of something that should never have happened. I stared at the shredded letter, realizing I had to leave it behind. Life hadn't stopped, even if it felt like it had. The house felt even quieter than before. though nothing had physically changed. Everything reminded me of the past days. Furniture, walls, even the way light fell onto the floor. But now, every corner of the house was filled with shadows of guilt and loss. Michael returned after a week. I heard his footsteps in the hallway as he approached the door, and my heart began to race. His presence, which had once brought me joy, was now a painful reminder. We met in the living room. His face was stern, his gaze cold, and in his hands were documents, which he dropped onto the table. "We need to talk," he said in a steady, detached voice. I looked at him, struggling to find the words. Everything inside me screamed, "Forgive me!" I knew what I had done, knew I had destroyed everything. "Michael, I'm sorry," I managed to say, but his gaze remained icy. He didn't reply, simply shifted his attention to the papers. For him, everything now came down to formalities, the legal matters that needed to be resolved. I tried to explain myself, to convey that I never intended to hurt him, but he wouldn't listen. His silence was the loudest answer. Later, I faced Marianne. She was sitting in the kitchen, her posture tense, her eyes fixed somewhere in the distance. She didn't look at me when I entered. "I know I can't change anything," I said, my voice trembling, "but please, forgive me." Her gaze finally met mine. There was no anger in her eyes, only cold, unwavering pain. "Forgive you?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "Emma, I will never forgive you." I was left alone at the kitchen table, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading away. Her words echoed in my mind like a verdict. I realized I could no longer stay here. The house that had once been a safe haven for me was now a place where every wall reminded me of my mistakes. I had to leave, to start over, even if I didn't know where to go. Packing my belongings into a bag, I closed the door to the house that was no longer my home. The cafe on the outskirts of town was nearly empty. Outside, a light rain drizzled, tracing thin lines down the window, as if underscoring the unspoken pain I felt. I arrived early, taking a corner table, and now sat with a cup of coffee that had long grown cold. My fingers idly traced the rim of the cup as my thoughts raced, jumping chaotically back to the events of the past weeks. I knew George would come. We had agreed to meet here to talk. Or rather, to say goodbye. After all, every other door had already closed. His leaving was inevitable, and I had to accept it, even if I didn't yet know how. The door opened, and I saw him enter. His figure seemed more hunched than usual, his movements slow and deliberate. He spotted me immediately and walked to the table, avoiding eye contact. He sat across from me, placing his hands on the table as if searching for stability. For a few moments, we just sat in silence. I studied his face, memorizing every line. Exhaustion and guilt had etched deep marks on it. This wasn't the confident man I once knew. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, unable to find the words. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered was already behind us. He continued, "Emma, I don't know how to express what I feel. I've ruined everything. I ruined your life, Marianne's, and my own." His voice faltered, and I could see him struggling to contain his emotions. "It wasn't just you," I said at last, breaking the heavy silence. "We both did this." The words were true, but they brought no relief. His gaze remained filled with pain and regret. "I'm leaving," he said after a minute, lowering his eyes. "For good. There's nothing left for me here." I had been expecting these words, but they still hit harder than I thought they would. I tried to keep my composure, but inside everything was breaking. His departure meant that everything that had connected us would finally be gone. "It's the right thing to do," I replied, though my voice was hoarse. "We both need to leave this behind." He nodded, but didn't move. We lingered in the moment, knowing that this farewell marked not just the end of our past, but also a part of ourselves. When he finally stood, his movements were slow and heavy. I watched him walk to the door, his figure blurred through the rain-streaked glass. He looked back once, but I averted my eyes. The door closed and silence filled the space around me. I sat motionless, unaware of how the droplets on the window turned into streams. George was gone, leaving me alone, and I felt as though a part of me had gone with him. The shattered past couldn't be pieced back together like a broken cup. Every shard was a reminder of the choices I had made and the life I had lost. But deep down, I knew that to move forward, I had to leave it behind. No regrets could change what had happened. The rain outside continued to fall, washing away his traces as if nothing had ever been. But inside me, this story would remain forever. The setting sun slowly sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. I stood at the edge of the canyon, staring into the distance. The wind played with my hair, as if trying to carry away the heavy memories weighing on my soul. This place was both terrifying and serene, much like my life now, teetering between the past and an uncertain future. Every step that brought me here left a scar. The home that was once my refuge had become a cage. The people I loved had turned into strangers. I had destroyed everything that mattered, and now I couldn't find a way to start anew. I closed my eyes, feeling the warm light of the sun caressing my skin. That light was a reminder that the world continued on, even if my life felt like it had stopped. The wind carried the scent of sage and earth, filling me with a strange sense of peace. My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The name on the display made my heart skip a beat. George. For a few seconds, I just stared at the message, hesitating to open it. Perhaps it was a goodbye, or maybe it was something more, but I didn't want to know. Everything connected to him was part of the pain, part of the past I needed to leave behind. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling a strange mix of longing and relief. If I opened that message, it would pull me back into the whirlwind of emotions I was trying to escape. The sun dipped lower, casting the canyon into a dance of shadows and light. My reflection at the edge of the cliff seemed incomplete, as if I were only part of this moment, belonging neither fully to the world nor to myself. I took a step back, moving away from the edge. The path that had brought me here stretched out behind me, empty, but promising the start of something new, even if I didn't know what lay ahead. Saying goodbye to George and everything we had been through was inevitable. That past could no longer be part of my life. But what now? For the first time, I was free. Free from expectations, from the opinions of others, from my own guilt. Slowly, step by step, I moved away from the canyon. The wind grew quieter, as if it too understood that my decision had been made. I didn't look back, didn't turn around. Everything left behind needed to stay in the past. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I dissolved into the shadowed road, leaving behind questions that no one could answer. A week had passed since I walked away from the canyon's edge. The city was behind me, as was the house filled with memories. I had rented a small room in an old motel, where the smell of dust and faded curtains reminded me daily that my life was starting from scratch. Every evening I went for a walk. I tried not to think about the past, but it returned like shadows under the streetlights. George, Michael, Mary Ann, their faces surfaced in my mind, reminding me that the destruction had been my own doing. One evening, I decided to stop at a small diner on the corner. Inside, the air smelled of fried bacon and coffee, and the worn wooden tables created a strange sense of comfort. I sat by the window, watching the rare passers-by walk along the street. "Emma?" The voice I heard made me freeze. I looked up and saw Michael. His face was unusually serious, but his eyes held something I couldn't immediately understand. He was dressed simply, jeans and a shirt as always, but his posture, his tone, everything about him seemed different. "May I sit?" he asked. I nodded, unsure how to react. His appearance here was so unexpected that I couldn't gather my thoughts. He sat across from me, placing his hands on the table. "I knew I'd find you eventually," he said calmly, though his voice was tense. "We need to talk." I didn't know what he wanted. Divorce papers? Final accusations? But he continued. "I thought I hated you, and maybe part of me still wants to, but that doesn't solve anything." His words sounded strange. This wasn't the Michael I had known before, full of fiery anger and resentment. The man before me was different, and it frightened me. "I'm not here to blame you. I want to understand why. Why did it all happen?" I didn't know how to answer. The words stuck in my throat. But before I could say anything, the diner door opened again, and I heard footsteps. I turned and saw George. His eyes met mine, and then he noticed Michael. The silence in the diner became tangible. "Michael," George said, his voice calm but filled with tension. Michael stood up. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. I sat there, feeling the air grow thick, as if the next moment could change everything. George took a step forward and Michael clenched his fists. Their gazes locked, and I realized this was only the beginning of something I couldn't predict.